Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 193 of Humanity Rising. It's been an extraordinary experience to be convening month after month of Humanity Rising as we've covered every imaginable issue confronting the human race at this moment, where we're all traversing the COVID pandemic. Over the last 3 days, we delved into the issue of public health, and we looked at the science of the pandemic. We looked at how we can increase our immune systems naturally. And yesterday we looked at the whole issue of developing the infrastructure and ethos of public health within the larger ecological context. Just imagine if human health was seen as an example of biomimicry, that we use nature as a model and a measure and a mentor for designing our health systems, at the center of which is donut economics. If you know Kate Rayworth, that imagine a donut and the inner circle is human well-being. What can we do as a society to be generative of human well-being? And then the outer circle of the donut is how do we develop human well-being within the context of ecological systems, natural processes, and constraints. And that was a very inspiring conclusion to a 3-day session on public health. In the spirit of biomimicry and nature as measure and mentor, let us just pause for a moment before we launch into our program and do the simplest thing in the world. Let us take a few deep breaths. We all breathe. The plants, the animals, the birds, the bees, the fish, everyone breathes. Let us close our eyes and settle into our bodies. Our bodies are nature. Our bodies are earth. And let us put our attention on our heart. Listen, if you can, to your heartbeat. And in a spirit of deep gratitude and thanksgiving that you're alive, take just a minute with your heart. Thank you, everyone. Now, with an open heart and a heart full of gratitude for each and every one of you who are joining our session today, let us commence our program with a reflection on work, the challenge we have of working together. If you think about work, the fact that we've been human for about the last 200,000 years, For about 175, 180,000 of those years, 190,000 of those years, we just worked by hunting and gathering, following the herds and gathering the berries and the fruit. Then about 10,000 years ago, we had the agricultural revolution and people transitioned to working the fields. And even as recently as 100, 125, 150 years ago, 90, 95% of the human race worked in agriculture. Then the Industrial Revolution gave rise to machines, and increasing numbers of us began to transition from agricultural work to industrial work in the great assembly lines of the capital system of Europe that were exported around the world. And then after the Second World War, about 75 years ago, we began to transition to information, to computers, to service economies. And now most of us work not in farms, not in industrial factories, but in information, and using computers as our place of work. And we can take these computers anywhere. And so work has been undergoing a revolution. And the revolution in work at a time in history where human knowledge, as they're telling us, is doubling every 12 and a half minutes. In a situation where 2/3 of the jobs 10, 15 years ago no longer exist. And 2/3 of the jobs that exist right now won't exist in 10 years. The average person is, due to, in a study that came out of Australia last year, has 17 different jobs in their career and 5 different sectors of professions. And people are mobile. And then the pandemic hit us and stopped the work as economies ground to a standstill. We were in lockdown, isolation. We couldn't go to the office, couldn't go to school. And so the question of work, not only within the context of the pandemic, but the context of a rapidly evolving and changing and dynamically shape-shifting political economy, is a real question for people all over the world. How do we sustain work? How do we reinvent work? So we're very privileged, in fact, today to have someone who knows a lot about that, Alfred Tolle. He's been a CEO of a company, Lycos, in Boston. He's been the VP at Bertelsmann, the massive publishing house, their online division. He's consulted with Google. He's worked with Otto Scharmer in the Presencing Institute that has done a lot with the youth theory, as many of you know, that has really shaped the way people work across the corporate and industrial sector. So Alfred Tolle, who's based in Germany, is coming to us today from Munich. I want to welcome you, Alfred, and thank you for joining us. And what we're going to do today, everyone, is Alfred's going to make a short presentation on the theme of working together. And then I'll circle back and I'll be tracking the comments in the chat box as we move through his presentation. Then we'll have a dialogue about the nature and future of work as we move into the 21st century. So Alfred, welcome.
Thank you very much, Jim, for this wonderful introduction and for having me here. And I'm looking forward for the next 60, 90 minutes, which we have together. And we took actually the question of how do we want to work together one step above and said, how do we want to live together? Work determined the way in the past very much how we live together. And I think the question should be, how do we want to live together? And that should determine how we want to work together as well. So let me start, if I may, my short presentation, and then I'm looking forward to answer questions and going into a dialogue with you, Jim. Is that okay? Wonderful. So let me quickly share my screen. All right. All right. So does everybody see my screen, and is it okay?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. So the question which we asked ourselves, how do we want to live together, came across since a long time ago, but is becoming more and more prominent, I think, in the time of the pandemic, where people feel isolated and not connected to each other. The question of and the statement of social distancing was all over the place in nearly every country. And I felt it's not a social distancing, it's more a physical distancing. But the question came, how do we want to live together? So how can we create the social kind of connecting part, even during times of pandemic, and especially after the pandemic? How should that look like? And this is what I would like to go through a little bit. Before I do that, Jim mentioned already my little bit employment history, which brought me to Japan, and from Japan to Korea, where I was serving on the board of a company, and which brought me then to Boston, Massachusetts, where I had the opportunity to meet Otto Schammer and his team, which then brought me to Ireland, to Dublin. Why I mention this is because this journey gave me the opportunity to see the world and the events which we experience in the world through different cultural perspectives. And I became to know the richness of our cultural differences, and embraced it during my work all the time, instead of standardizing it, actually embracing differences and embracing the different perspectives, how we should approach things and how we should work and how we should live together. So that has had a lot of influence on me and my background. And so working in a lot of different countries and continents, I came to the conclusion, and this is something which I borrowed from Otto Schammer from the Presencing Institute, but I experienced that through my personal path as well, that we are experiencing three major divides: an ecological divide, a social divide, and a spiritual divide. And the ecological divide, especially I experienced that when I was working at Google, where a lot of people actually were focusing on technology as the solution for a lot of our problems and challenges which we are facing. I experienced that this kind of usage of technology brought us even more further away from us instead of towards us, which has a spiritual aspect, but also a natural aspect. So we are using nature either to produce technology or to regenerate when we go into the forest, but we never or seldomly understand that we are part of nature. Nature is in us and we are nature. So if we connect with ourselves, we connect with the nature around us, and this has an effect on nature. So this interconnectedness was very important. And the social divide, so the divide between self and others, is, I think the United Nations had a study on this about 2 or 3 years ago, when they said we have only a handful of people who have access to more financial resources than the bottom 50% of our world population. And that actually is more and more prominent in the days of the pandemic as well. We see the consequences of this kind of social divide very much in a lot of aspects of our societies. And this is the surface, what we see. But underneath this iceberg, the surface of the iceberg, we have to look at the structures, the thought, and the source of inspiration. And how can we bring that together? We currently see a lot of people focusing on the externalities and saying, okay, how do I change the external world? And my experience is that we need to understand who we are in order to change the outer world as well. But let me come to the next assumption, the organizational level, where we had, and Jim mentioned it already, and the industrial world, beginning of the 19th century, we had hierarchy and control, so top down. And sometimes I experienced those companies still when I was in countries, in the Arabian countries, for instance. You still have this kind of structure where there is one leader who controls everything and determines how everybody should work and should behave. And in other markets, you know, a little bit further, I think it was the 70s or 80s, we had the free market, where we thought, well, the market will lead us and guide us to the right thing. And that created a big abundance of material wealth. Not for everybody, but it gave us the opportunity to understand how we can create something in the material world as well, with a lot of course, externality costs. And when we recognize that in the environmental area, in the social area, we started to go to the next phase of negotiation, where we said we have to understand what we produce in terms of externalities, and how we can negotiate not only with our shareholders, but with our stakeholders, and including nature and labor and everything into this mix. But still, the intention and the purpose was to ensure that we are not destroying the ground on which we create profit and prosperity and growth for that particular entity. And I think we are starting to understand, or some parts of our society starting to understand, that we need to come to the co-creative space, where we understand that everything we do, every thought we have, has an effect in the external world, and that we need to take that into consideration, and that we rather try to find out what wants to emerge, instead of setting a goal and trying to please every stakeholder in order to become the dominant company or organization in that particular market segment. But in order to do that, we need to step back to look at the larger picture of the economic system. And that is not what everybody can do, because, and I take this theory, only a little bit of snapshot of the theory from Robert Keegan is a little bit more sophisticated. In order to step back and look at the broader picture, you need to be able to do that. And people who are in this stage, what Robert Keegan defined as a socialized mind, they say, my relationship, I follow the rules. So these people are in the system, and they are working in the system, and defining themselves as what their relationship with the system and with their peers are, which are around them. The next stage, which are pretty much supported in the so-called civilized and industrialized world, the leaders are, they should become in the self-authoring mind. So they have the opportunity to step back, look at the larger picture, say, I have an identity, I make choices, put up their sleeves and said, we can fix everything. But these people ask themselves the question, am I doing the things right? So they are still inside of a system, but they have the chance to look at one level of this system and can change that as well, but still inside a broader framework. And the self-transforming mind is what Robert Keegan said. These are people who say, I hold my identities, I embrace paradox, which means they ask themselves the question, am I doing the right things? And not, am I doing the things right? So those people are, having the chance to look at a broader level, from a broader level, to the overall system, and can say, what does it mean to change things? And what is my part in why I would like to change the things I would like to change? How do I see the world? Through which eyes do I see this world? And I found that once I had the opportunity to work with this model a little bit more, also with leaders around the world, and applied that to my own kind of activities in that particular part of my life, I understood that this is important in order really to change something, to have the opportunity to see it from a broader perspective and have a systemic view on this. The consequences of our disconnection, we see that, and I mentioned that broadly, we have an environmental problem, that we are currently, I think we are consuming 1.5 Earths every year. So we are consuming more than the Earth is able to regenerate. And you can break it down into countries. It might have changed a little bit, but 0 points, I think, during the pandemic, not really substantial. I think America is consuming around 4 Earths, Germany about 2.53, and so on. So you can break that down. So there needs to be a tremendous change in that. Also, the social divide I mentioned already, and it became even worse. And the pandemic shows us the consequences of that, and will show us the consequences pretty soon. And then on the personal individual level, we see that, that a lot of people are suffering from depression. I think 6 months ago, the United Nations published a study where they think that about 10% of the world population are suffering on depression. Most of these people are in the so-called industrialized world, civilized world, and and a lot of those people are going even really deep into depression, and we see an increase, especially with children, in the pandemic right now, who are close to suicide, and we see the numbers of suicide also rising. So VUCA, many of you might have heard about VUCA, this volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, which is determining our working space and living space since actually technology massively came into our world. That accelerated the amount and the time of change which we experienced. And so it went from stability to volatility, from certainty to uncertainty, from simplicity to complexity, and clarity to ambiguity. Not that everything was great when we were in the comfort zone, but now we are discovering that a lot of people feel very discomfort and uncertain, and they are longing for certainty. And we see that around the world on the political scene, that the renaissance of people who tell the others, I know where to go, please follow me, very radically, even though that they obviously have no solutions, but they pretend to have some. And a lot of people want to follow this because they think if they follow this kind of people who pretend to have a clear vision of where to go, they feel more comfortable. And that is a very dangerous situation which we have, and has also, again, something to do with how mature are you with your own personal development, and how can you bring that to the world. So what can we do? Albert Einstein said a problem cannot be solved at the same level of thinking that created it. We should develop a substantially new manner if humankind is to survive. And I think instead of looking outside of ourselves, we should first explore what is happening inside of us. So, because insight is again determining how we experiencing the world, which means once we have a thought about certain things, that creates an emotion, the emotion creates behavior, behavior manifests what we think is the right thing to do in this world, and that creates what we're experiencing. And again, that creates the thought, the emotion, and the behavior again. So it's very important to look inside of ourselves without having immediate solutions, but trying to find the right questions for us. To explore deeper wisdom, I think we need to come from volatility to a vision. So who am I, and where do I want to go? From uncertainty to understanding, what is the inner source from where I operate? Complexity to clarity. So really understand that you don't need to follow every impulse which is coming from you from the outside world. And ambiguity to agility means that you are very grounded and rooted where you are and comfortable with yourself, means in the continuous process of change, and then creating by doing so a lot of flexibility that you can create, react, coordinate, work with other people. So affirming our individual and collective capacity to rise the challenge of these times in with deeper wisdom, resilience, compassion, and skillfulness. And the Barrett Values Center, long time ago already, said that culture is very prominent in this process. And Peter Drucker once said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And that was taken over by a lot of MBA schools around the world. And those MBA schools then started to think about what is culture? How can we define it? How can we embrace it? How can we create a context for people who understand what culture is, while not being, especially during the pandemic, together? So they are in their home offices. We are working more with dynamic networks. We are working with a matrix organization where you don't have continuous colleagues for years. You have a colleague for a project, and then the next person followed. When I was working at Google, I was working around the world with people and on certain projects. But still, the importance is to be with you and understand who you are, and to align your values. And based on that, that is the foundation for a strategy. So how do I want to work? How do I want to live together? And then based on that, you can develop with a common understanding the structure of how you want to organize it. So we are creating reality through our stories, which means once we have a story of how the world is happening, that is, and I mentioned it, determining our thoughts, our emotions, our actions, our behavior. So Anais Nin once said, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. And Even Marcus Aurelius, he once said, if you are distressed by anything external or internal, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but due to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at every moment. And that's why it's so important to create for yourself an environment where you first of all can develop yourself, but also, go together with people who have the same kind of openness and understanding of our interconnectedness. And don't judge that immediately, but see how it really, what kind of impression it has on you, the reaction, what you see from colleagues and partners. And that is where a lot of actually communities around the world is also, they found out that it's very important, the continuous development of themselves for the individual as well as for the collective. And Jim mentioned it already, and one part is an open mind. So if I tell you that water flows uphill, that you don't say immediately, that's not possible, the laws of gravitation. But you might say, well, this is an interesting idea. Let's explore what would happen if that would be true. And that is, to accept non-confirming data. That is no longer downloading, that is actually creating something new and open up your mind for new things, what might occur out of that thought. And of course, children know that, and they said grown-ups never understand anything by themselves. And it is tiresome for children to be always and forever explaining things to them, because they often have this openness and not a kind of determined view of the world and a certain project. Empathy is also important to that. So an open mind and to be empathetic. And there are a lot of studies around this already. And I had the opportunity to work together with Tanya Singer, a professor of neuroscience from the Max Planck Institute. She did a long-term study on loving kindness meditation. And she found out that empathy and compassion are actually different areas in your brain, different traits. But you can train them by a certain way of meditation or meditation techniques. And not only that you can train that, so it really has a physical effect that these parts of your brain are growing, but you also, this has an effect on your social mind, so your social activities and the way you perceive things and the way you work and live with people together. And that is actually something we really need in this world today. The last thing is the open will. So the open will is completely being the present by using your intuition. And a quiet mind is able to hear intuition over fear. We see, or I see currently, a lot of fear and anxiety when I'm looking around me. And because people are, following this energy of, numbers, judgments and statements from sometimes very unqualified people, but it's just right going into this, they want they want themselves actually to be recognized. And that's why they often, what I see in politics, but also in the media, that they embrace this kind of information, which is not very helpful for supporting the self-empowerment of people. So intuition is, for that part, very important. And when I'm working with different companies and organizations, from NGOs to for-profit organizations, and I'm speaking to some leaders, all of them tell me that intuition is so important for their decision-making process. And to give you one example from Konosuke Matsushita, he created Matsushita Corporations long time ago in the 50s, which is now known as Philip Corporations. He said once, no matter how deep a study you make, What you really have to rely on is your own intuition. And when it comes down to it, you really don't know what's going to happen until you do it. But this kind of openness, again, needs a certain maturity of yourself, of your personality. And this maturity and these people I found in organizations as well as in communities when I go there and I explore how the different ways how people test how they want to live together, and how new ideas can come up for the broader society. I see that there are often people who are kind of working on their matureness, working on their inner development, and not only for themselves, going into an island and saying, I would like to create my personal development and spiritual development here, and I don't want to see the other world. Most of those people creating an environment around them because they want to explore what kind of ideas can come up and could have an effect and could support the broader society, nationally as well as internationally. I left Google in 2016 and I founded a nonprofit association called Wisdom Together, where we bring together scientists, artists, spiritual leaders, as well as business people to deepen the consciousness. For instance, we did a conference in Stockholm, we did 2 conferences in Munich, we did 1 in Oslo, and we also doing conferences with partners. One we did in Russia, 1 in Costa Rica, where we support partners who are going into the same direction. And it's really about understanding who you are and how you can contribute in what you're doing to the world. What is the source of my engagement? Why am I attracted by a certain way of thinking or a certain way of action? Why is that? What is happening in me? And sometimes also you're coming to points, blockages, traumatic experiences, but there is again the community which is around you, which might help you on an individual base, but also on the collective to overcome this and make this experience open and valuable for the broader society. So we are working on intelligent library for transformation, or partnerships, retreats, workshops, the important heart-to-heart connection, which we think Zoom or other video conferencing systems are great at this point of time, but it cannot really substitute the personal meeting, the heart-to-heart connection. And so that's why we are planning a symposium this year in Munich, or close to Munich, in the German Alps, with the title, How Do We Want to Live Together? And we would like to invite neuroscientists, but also people who have founded and lived in communities from different angles. There will be one person from Vienna, for instance, who is creating an enterprise, which is, or a non-profit, which is saying the village in town, as well as people who created a community outside Tamera in Portugal, or the Schloss Tempelhof in Germany. So a lot of those people were coming together and inspiring themselves by impulse speeches, but it will be very participative. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward for our further conversation.
Thank you, Alfred. Very inspiring. Why don't we start more personally? I'd love to hear from you what work experiences in your past galvanized in you this focus on work and living together. Was there a particular inspirational moment? Was there a particular trauma? It'd be worth just letting people in on your odyssey and how you arrived at this particular focus in your professional life.
It's a wonderful question, Jim. Thank you for that. It started actually a long time before I started my professional life. And I lost my parents when I was pretty young, my mother when I was 9 and my father when I was 13. And I accompanied my father to the emergency room, who was suffering a heart attack at that time. And he was then brought into the emergency room, and I couldn't go in there. And the doctor came out 5 minutes later and he said, "Sorry, we couldn't do anything." And at that moment, I felt a kind of, and this is of course a reflection which I have now, I hadn't had it at that time. But it was more this kind of, I saw the world and I saw my situation and myself from a broader angle. So it was like, of course I was sad, but it was more this feeling of secureness in a way. And that accompanied me through my whole life. And I got a scholarship when I was later on, when I was studying actually theater and economics and later to Japan. And there I met an abbot from a Zen Buddhist monastery, which I went to every week, and that gave me a big impression on myself. And when I left, he gave me one advice of 2 sentences. He said, "Alfred, remember, there is no good or bad, there is no right or wrong." And at that time, I was a person who had a clear understanding. Here are the good people, and here are the bad people. And that irritated me quite a lot and accompanied me through my whole life. Still it is, actually. Beautiful. And that was then helping me a little bit later on when I was on, shareholder meetings or when I was on the board of companies, that I always felt this is a part of me, but this is not really, I play a role here. And I connected to certain people, and I felt that some people they think these numbers and this concept in which they're living in are real, and they felt very anxious and very pressured around this. And I'm always trying to give them a little bit a different perspective, to reframe the angle, how they see their situations. Because that is something, and I was successful here and there, not with all people, but with some people I was. And those people then later on came to me, and I still have a good relationship to those people, was that was the moment when they changed the way how they acted in this world. And that is, I think, the moment, this little moments we need to collect, and this is what you do with Ubiquity University and Humanity Arising, that I think there is always an opportunity to get something out of this when they're listening to stories. And that is the moment of change.
Mm. Well, it's interesting. Harriet Crosby is making a point in the chat that a lot of what you're talking about is the feminine approach to living, being intuitive, connecting to nature, respecting each other, paying attention to our interior life, open-heartedness, knowing our spiritual self, and connecting to life. Are you resonant with that? Is this something that you consciously have been pursuing, the more feminine aspects? Because that seems to be an organizing principle of the recommendations that you're making.
I think we have forgot about the feminine aspects of our lives pretty much because we are, especially as male, we are forced into certain roles, but we all have a feminine and a male aspect inside of us, and one is more prominent than the other. But and I don't think we should neglect one of this aspect and the power of that. We should bring that meaningful together. And again, a quote from Einstein once said that intuition is a sacred gift, and our rational mind is its servant. And we have created a society which is honoring the servant and forgot about the gift. And I think it's time right now to understand that, to acknowledge that, and bring that together. And sometimes when you are too much, when you are working too much on one side of the medal, you tend to shift a little bit for a while on the other side. But it's really about to bring those both aspects together, I feel.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's certainly the challenge, and I think the feminine sort of tonality to your approach, I think is connected to what you were saying early on in your presentation around the ecological context for human existence, life, work, and interactivity. That the more we engage in a synergy with the larger ecosystem,
Mm.
sort of by natural progression of things, we become more feminine. I'm thinking
Yeah.
of Janine Benyus's notion of biomimicry,
Yeah.
that it's time for humans in living and working
Mm.
to just come back into the rhythm of the life process itself, which would require of us, I think, a more feminine disposition of being. Would you agree with that? What would be your comment on that?
I tend to agree to this. I think the focus currently should be more on our feminine part, because we haven't used that for a long time, and we have created a society, and especially a working environment, which is more male dominant. And even if we want to, also from the official side, I think in Germany they have right now created a law where you need, if you're a listed company, you need in the board at least one woman if you have three people in the board. But I don't think that is only one step, or might be one step, but I think it's more about to understand, to create the consciousness of that. And when I'm working with leaders, 10 years ago or so, it was people were not daring to speak about spirituality at all. When we did in 2015 in Stockholm conference, I was talking to some leaders in Sweden. They were interested in what we are doing. Otto Schammer was there, and we had Angangak there, and the Eskimo, and we had some spiritual leaders there. So, and those people were those leaders of bigger companies. They were interested in that, but they were not daring to come there and officially state that they are there. So what we offered them, what we did, is actually at the opposite of the street, there was a hotel, and to have a lunch with those people and with some of the speakers, which I brought them over when they were not on stage, so to discuss and bring this topic into this mind. Nowadays, I think much more people are open for spirituality, the feminine aspect of it as well, the intuition. It is a topic which you can openly discuss these days, I feel. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a good juncture to ask you the question that I've been wanting to ask you. Is you've experienced Google, you've experienced Bertelsmann, you've been at the Presencing Institute, you've been in Japan. As you view the corporate sector, Alfred, what do you see out there in that landscape? Are there any companies that are exemplifying what you believe we all need to pay attention to? Is it a desert out there? Are there any examples that come to mind that you could say these companies are really doing the right thing in terms of living and working?
Well, I think there are examples of companies, also bigger companies, who are here and there testing things out. Um, Let me start with Google, for instance. Google started this Search Inside Yourself initiative. with Chek Meng Tang, where I was working in Dublin, and we had a meditation room, and I invited people for meditation. And then based on that meditation, a lot of conversation came up. And one of those conversations was actually about really then on the bigger level, the tax issue at that moment of time. And still Google is trying to avoid paying taxes where they can, but not breaching the law, but using the loopholes. And when I spoke to high up people in that organization at Google, also in California, they said, "Oh, Alfred, what is your opinion? Do you think we should pay taxes?" And I said, "Definitely, I think we should pay taxes in the countries where we make money." And they said, "Why? We are not breaching any law." And I said, "Well, first of all, have you heard about social responsibility, which comes with this inner consciousness process, from my perspective, my view?" And I thought, am I too much European to have this kind of view or approach? And they said, "Oh, Alfred, don't you think it's better to take $100 million and build schools in Africa than to give it to a broken democratic system?" And I said, "That's a bold statement. First of all, you don't do it. You don't take 100 million and build schools in Africa, which would be great, but you don't. Secondly, even if you would, you put yourself in the shoes of an elected government, how broken that system is. But honestly speaking, I don't want to be governed by a 100% commercial-oriented entity, because there is more in life than commerce." That was very hard to swallow for some people out of the valley, but I think, this conversation can happen at Google, which is a great part. It cannot happen in BMW. Hard to have those conversations, for instance. So they have this aspect. There is a B. Grimm organization in Thailand, for instance. It's a big conglomerate, not as big as Google, but pretty large. They made about $5 billion or so a year. And they asked the Gross National Happiness Institute from Bhutan, Julia Kim and To Han Vin, to come over and teach them compassionate mindfulness. So they went there and they established groups of Thai people who can then bring that deeper into the organization. There is the Eileen Fisher, who is really pretty much going into the direction of conscious leadership, and decided consciously not to be listed, but to involve the voices of all the employees and doing a leadership organization. There's Mondragon in Spain. I don't know whether you heard about those folks, who were built with the intention to create workspace for people. And even when there was hard times for certain sectors of this organization, they paid these people through. And when we asked them why did you do that? They said, because our intention and our attitude was, that's why we created this company, to create employment for those people. And we always made it through the crisis. And, by shifting, and the CEO, by the way, I think cannot be paid higher than 20 times what the lowest payment of this company is. In America, I think, we're talking about 2,000 times or something like that. Yeah. So that are certain constituencies which I think they did right. There's still a lot of things which you can say here and there they need to shift. But I see that there is a tendency and a longing for some companies and some people who do this. Did that answer the question a little bit?
Yeah. And then within that context, Maura Konyan has a question. Do you feel that the topic of grief is something that could or should be introduced into corporate culture? Would that open things up?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I believe it certainly would. But grief is something which goes deeply into the psychology and the psyche of every person individually. And that is something which needs to have a room of trust. So you need to create a company and environment where a lot of trust is there. And that is sometimes very hard. You can find it here and there. At Google, I had a lot of conversations, even though I was in the business sector as well. So people came to me because they understood that I don't take this kind of business objectives so serious. It was more that I wanted to use the platform of Google to bring more, compassion and empathy. So you have that here and there in companies, but I haven't found a company where the overall structure and system has a foundation of trust, which enables people to speak about grief. Here and there, you can do that in certain areas, but not, and at least not what I experienced yet.
Well, it's interesting to follow with Google as an example here. I know that Google has a very innovative way of interviewing people for jobs. They are less and less looking at their college degree and more putting them through, an interview process and have concluded that the worst people to hire are the people from Harvard and Yale and the Ivy League schools because they don't have any intellectual humility, and that the best people to hire are people who've suffered, people have experienced some kind of trauma, but have come through the experience because they have more soft skills. They're more humble. They're more cooperative. They're more empathetic. They're more capable of forming cross-boundary teams and thinking out of the box. So I think, this question around grief and suffering and humility, I think is an important aspect that I think you're right. The corporate sector, by and large, is focused on other things. But to the degree to which they honor these softer emotions that connect us with our humanity and our humility, they would be well served.
I think so too. I think it would, and it could give a good direction. When I came to Google, that was in 2011. We had an interviewing process with three elements, cognitive abilities, your flexibility, association, and whether you understand actually the business concept of Google. And we fought a lot to bring this emotional intelligence part into it. That wasn't the part at that time. And then I spoke to some people from HR, from Intel, who were also at Google. And this person, they said, yeah, we looked a lot of data for a while, but the attrition rate was very bad, and we didn't hire the right people often. So we got rid of that. And what we did is, for the higher positions, that we brought the people who this person are probably working together with his potential peers. We brought them together in a camp, setting a fire, cooking, doing social activities, and seeing how these people actually react there. And that is how we then hired them. Of course, we looked a little bit of his or her skills, but it was more this aspect. And Google didn't came so far, I have to say. Google still is looking a lot on numbers, and that is by Intel also the same. My interest is not, can you hire a social person or even a conscious person to use this skill to support the company's goals, which was at that time 20% year-over-year growth. So again, to step on the meta perspective and saying, okay, and I had this conversation a lot with a lot of people at Google, saying, why do we need 20% year-over-year growth? Why do we need that? And they said, we need it because we're a listed company, and we need to hire top talents, and top talents we get through stock options, and that's why we need that. And I said, first of all, it's not true. We are Google at that time was the biggest private owned listed company, with Larry and Sergey owning, I think, more than 56 or 57, 58%. So I said, if you guys think that, this is the direction we should go, you should tell the analysts instead of waiting what the analysts are telling you. And that is what I think is the important thing, what we now have to recognize. And there is a company in India, Chipli, a pharmaceutical company, actually. I spoke to the former CEO years ago about this. He's listed, but they are not, he said, I said, how do you tell the quarterly reports with the analysts? How do you do that? And he said, we tell the analysts what we do, and then they can do whatever they want to do with it. And I think that's a better approach, which brings you from a reaction part into an action part. How do I want to see the world? How do I want to create something where people can live with purpose, where people can create something for the health and the benefits of the Indian population? That was their mission statement, instead of for the health and the benefit of the shareholders, which might be different.
Well, very much so. I think, this is a good opportunity to bring in a question from Sarita Patel. What do you think, Alfred, about the commercial narrative where leaders have coaches and stylists who prepare leaders to seem as if they are relatable, but then have no real leadership skills for change? And I think that this, in some ways, is a $64,000 question that you were just alluding to. You have a capitalist economic design in which, by law, the corporations are accountable to shareholder interests, and that they're motivated with profitability. And there is very little strictures on the rapaciousness with which they can treat people and the ecology. And so when you come in and trying to raise consciousness at the individual level or even a group level, you're doing so within a corporate structure that by and large is designed to be destructive, to maximize profit and market share. How do you wrestle with that contradiction?
So first of all, I believe that major change, what we need to see in this world to really understand how we want to live together with the focus of humanity and life, doesn't come from the bigger companies and bigger systems. It will come from the civil society. And I think the focus should be to create safe spaces for the civil society to come together to explore how we can develop new ways of and new structures of how we want to live and work together. And that includes what kind of position we would like to give money in the financial area. Nipun Mehta from Service Space, he wrote an article once about the 8 forms of capital. And money was one of that, but only one. There is relationship, development, and a lot of different things is there. So that's one thing. On the bigger companies, there are still examples. The former CEO of Unilever, for instance, he was somebody who facilitated change because he has experienced that we can't actually destroy our nature by cutting trees in the rainforest and creating to create palm oils and he gave it he changed that. He quit that in Unilever. So Unilever stopped that. So for me, it was a good example that there are people and in organizations who can use their power to even, go beyond this destructive system or even change the destructive system. As I said, I think we have the power inside of ourselves. If we are not anxious, if we are not fearing, oh, I might lose this position, or I might lose my friends, or I might lose my mortgage rate, my house, how can I break that? If we are in this cave, very, very hard, to make conscious decisions. But if we understand that whatever we do, we can create it by ourselves, it's a decision for ourselves, and whatever will happen, that is where real change happens. And that is what I'm trying in my coaching activities to bring to these people and say, it's your decision. It's your decision what you want to see in this world, in this organization, and even beyond. And that is something you need to embrace, and you can do that. I think you can.
Yeah, Lillian Mavidara is making an interesting point that if Google was a person, Google would be experiencing great inner discomfort.
Yeah, true.
On one hand, meditating and using compassion and leadership skills makes us feel good. But
Mhm.
on the other hand, exploiting humans, land, and other resources for personal benefit makes us feel bad. And she's just making the point that we've got to find a bridge somehow. And what
Yeah.
you're saying is that you're always looking for this bridge, and it
Mhm.
comes down to the transformation of individual people within
Yeah.
the system. That
Yeah.
somehow, like the CEO of Unilever, will make a difference just because their own inner sense of integrity
Mhm.
demands it.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And by doing so, he creates a kind of field where other people can relate on and can go in. And that creates a momentum and that can facilitate change. But again, there are very few of these people who are in that leading positions those days. And that's why those company leaders should connect with the civil society. That should be the basis. And from there, we can, if we want to, by understanding that our personal development is continuously creating ideas and something can emerge out of that. That could really change the way how we're going to live together in a meaningful and purposeful way.
Now, Alfred, as you look at the landscape of work and life from the vantage point of the pandemic after a year of challenge,
Mm.
what do you what do you see out there in the corporate sector or the social sector as both some of the consequences of the pandemic, but also what are the leverage points that you see that were not available before, but might be useful in contemplating as we all seek transformation in some way out of the crisis that the pandemic has placed before us?
I think again, very important is that people are reflecting and working on their inner self. Because what I see currently is that people are so much want to have an end to this pandemic of separation, of also kind of you know they are desperate, a lot of people. And I think the real consequences we will see in the next couple of years, probably, what happened here. But if you are with yourself, you can see that as an opportunity to understand what do we want to create. And for me, that's why this question comes up so prominently around the world, on different levels of society. Also with CEOs, I'm talking to this at Alfred. So what? How do we really want to live together? Is that really important what I'm doing here? This product producing and creating more profit or so? Is that really something we want to accelerate and again and still and continuing to do that? Or do we really want to see what have we learned, not only through the pandemic, but beforehand as well, and how can we use it and bring that into a society which is serving life and on a much more meaningful way. So what the government, the corporate world calls business development is for me more important than ever, but business development was a different definition. Business development in terms of not how can I increase my profit, but business development, how can I increase my social, my environmental, and my spiritual impact in a meaningful way for everybody. And I think those questions are coming up more and more. And what we want to do with Wisdom Together, and I think this is what I understand what you are doing here as well on a much broader scale, is to bring people together to embrace those questions and to see what does it mean concretely? How can we build something? And on this symposium, which we do here in Germany, there are people coming together who have built little companies around that. They started 20 or 30 years ago with a community. But then they built it out of that. They made a tea farm out of it, where they hired the local people. Actually, they have a magazine which is telling about those initiatives around the DACH region, and we have companies like SecChem. I don't know whether you heard about these guys in Egypt. So bringing those people together, discussing what they did, what are their ingredients for what they currently experience as success, and what could they do even better, and what they have learned along the path. It is a time to bring that together, to create the spaces, but not only to talk, but also to do something concretely, really starting new enterprises. I wouldn't call it businesses, because business is defined in a way which is inside of this destructive system. I would more call it enterprises approach for in terms of co-creation.
Well, I think that's an inspirational point that you're making, and a good point with which to conclude our discussion. Alfred, I can feel all the way through our dialogue today the compassion of your heart. I just want to acknowledge that you're working in a very tough, power-driven context when one goes into business and government, and it seeks to shift the level of consciousness within structures that are designed to mitigate against that. And so you're hammering your integrity on a very tough anvil, and I just want to acknowledge the work that you're doing. And I would note, and maybe you want to make a comment on this, that you're saying that the solution really needs to come from civil society.
Yeah, that's true. And maybe I can conclude with one quote of C.G. Jung, the psychoanalyst, Switzerland. He once said, I'm not what happened to me, I'm what I choose to become. And I think that should be the attitude and the notion for creating a new society.
Well, and I think that point by Carl Jung could not be more important. You know, we aren't what the pandemic has forced us to be. We are how we respond to the challenges of the pandemic. And I think that's what gave rise to Humanity Rising. You know, we were all kind of hunkered down, being determined by the pandemic. And then a couple of us got together and said, wait a minute,
Mm-hmm.
the issue here, as you pointed out with Marcus Aurelius, is not the event. The event is ultimately neutral. I mean, that uh, priest in Japan told you the right advice. It's how you respond
Yeah.
that is the key and the determinant
Yeah.
of the moral integrity that you develop as a personality and as an individual. So I think you exemplify that integrity clearly. And I think for those of us in the civil society sector, I think your admonition that it has come down to us at this moment in history to lead the change, and that's why we have Humanity Rising. I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful wisdom together. Humanity Rising are just different names for that same impulse of empowering people in their ordinary, everyday lives to make the kind of choices that cultivate and nurture authenticity, integrity, compassion, empathy, and service to the greater good. No matter what is happening from the outside in, we're responsible for what happens from the inside out.
Absolutely. Thank
And
you. Thank you for doing what you're doing, Jim. It's wonderful.
thank you, Alfred, and thank you, everyone. I want to invite everyone into the after session chat, and the link just was put up in the chat box. And then tomorrow, everyone, we're going to, rather on Monday, we're going to start a whole week on the question of peace. We're going to have a peace lab, and it's being curated by the very people that have been organizing our chat action group. And that has been one of the most beautiful aspects of Humanity Rising, the way Stan Pokros and Leslie Southwick came together with dozens and now hundreds of people from all over the world. Through the daily sessions of Humanity Rising, they began to just formulate their own identity. They then started to develop chats, sessions after our regular sessions so that we could have a more informal kind of debrief on a daily basis. They've been developing a compendium of summaries of every single session on Humanity Rising for those of you who are interested. And now they've taken the initiative generated some months ago to convene 5 consecutive days on the question of what does it take for humans at this moment to create peace. And they're looking at it in terms of race, in terms of society, in terms of politics, in terms of the environment. This whole issue of peace is not just the absence of war. It's not just the absence of violence. But as Alfred's been saying today, it's a proactive, from the inside out manifestation of deep caring for all sentient beings and the willingness to be a causative factor in the betterment of relationships and society, and thereby the human future. So we have a beautiful week in store all next week. And Alfred, I applaud you. You've teed it up beautifully. And next week we'll go deeper over the next 5 days. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you in the after session chat in a moment or two. And then we'll see you on Monday, same time, same station, 5:00 p.m. Central European Time, here on Humanity Rising. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Alfred. See you
Thank you,
Monday.
everybody. Thank you, Jim. Bye.
Well done.